Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into something pretty fundamental, something that affects, well, every single moment of your waking life, often without you even realizing it.
We're talking about how you actually perceive reality.
Exactly. And specifically, why your view of the world is probably, let's say, less subjective than you might think it is.
That's right. We've been looking at some fascinating source material for this dive excerpts from a chapter, actually, that really pulls back the curtain on cognitive biases.
Cognitive biases.
Yeah, these powerful, often invisible psychological tools that are constantly shaping the world you experience.
Right. And our mission here is to try and really understand these fundamental filters because, as we'll get into, the difference between how life is
Mm.
and the story your mind tells you about it.
Hmm.
Well, that gap can be surprisingly vast.
It really can. And that's the fascinating, sometimes challenging heart of this deep dive.
So where do we start?
Well, it all really begins with the core concepts. The source material highlights right at the start naive realism.
Naive realism. Okay, let's unpack this. It sounds, well, maybe a little naive. What's the basic idea there?
It's essentially our deeply ingrained default setting as humans.
Yeah.
It's the fundamental assumption that you perceive the world exactly as it exists, objectively out there.
Ah, okay.
You assume your senses, your thoughts, they provide a direct, accurate window onto reality.
So it's like I'm just looking through a perfectly clear pane of glass at everything,
Yeah.
no distortion.
Precisely that. You trust that your experience of a situation is the objective truth of that situation. Simple as that. Or so we think.
But the source material immediately throws a wrench in that, doesn't it? It brings in the words of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman.
Yes, Kahneman's quote is really a cornerstone here. He says, and this is powerful, the confidence people have in their beliefs is not a measure of the quality of evidence,
Okay.
but of the coherence of the story that the mind has managed to construct.
Wow. The coherence of the story the mind has constructed. That doesn't sound like a clear window at all. That sounds more like editing
Yeah,
or storytelling.
it absolutely does. It strongly suggests that what feels like objective truth to you is actually a narrative, a story your brain has very carefully assembled.
So my subjective experience is that constructed story. It's
Uh-huh.
not a direct feed from reality.
Exactly. Not a direct feed from objectivity, anyway.
And this ties into what David McCraney says in the source material too, right? He makes a really striking point about how even with like 100 years of psychology research, we still basically operate as if naive realism is true. We just inherently trust our thoughts and feelings.
We do. Because, as McCraney points out, you only ever experience the output of your mind. Think about it.
Right.
Everything, every sight, sound, thought, feeling, memory, it all happens inside your skull. You don't have some separate external reference point you can use to compare your internal reality against.
So you can't actually know objective reality, not directly. And you can't even really know how much of what feels real is something your mind made up or
Right.
twisted because everything is happening internally.
Your entire reality is filtered through your own processing. There's no getting around it.
Okay.
So if your reality is being built inside this, amazing, complex, but also, frankly, fallible system,
Yeah.
the question becomes, what are the specific psychological tools it uses for that construction?
And this is where the cognitive biases come in.
Exactly.
The source identifies 8 particularly common ones. These are like the standard toolkit for building reality.
Sort of, yeah. They act as these powerful builders or filters. And the source also mentions, interestingly, that people can develop their own unique biases too, probably variations or combinations of these core ones.
Understanding these tools then seems key to understanding the blueprint of your own mind, and maybe, crucially, the minds of others too.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
fundamental.
Okay, so here's where we start looking at those tools, maybe layer by layer. Let's jump into the first one the source describes, projection.
Right, projection. This one's fundamental because, well, like we just discussed, your internal world is all you know directly.
Mm-hmm.
So you inevitably project your own preferences, your state of consciousness, your assumptions onto basically everything you see.
You project yourself outward.
Pretty much. The source has a great line for this. The world is not as it is as we are.
The world is as we are. That's a powerful idea. The source gives examples like assuming others are just as nervous as you are in a situation. Or maybe it's confident.
Exactly. Or overestimating how typical your own, maybe slightly odd feelings are, just because your inner experience is your only real baseline.
So you're seeing the world through the lens of whatever you're feeling or thinking right now.
It's that automatic assumption that your internal landscape is somehow a universal map for everyone else's. Think about how this shapes first impressions, right? You project your own comfort levels or maybe your own anxieties onto someone you've just met.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the next tool in the box? The source mentions extrapolation.
Ah, extrapolation. This is when you take a current moment, a feeling, a situation, maybe it's incredibly good, maybe it's incredibly bad, and you mistakenly project it like indefinitely onto your entire future life.
You assume the present moment is basically permanent?
Yeah, you assume it's going to last forever.
Ah, okay. Like why, maybe, tragedies feel like they will never end. Or, on the flip side, why moments of pure happiness can sometimes feel precarious, almost fragile, like they're about to disappear any second.
That's it, exactly. The source notes that, fearing happiness won't last can actually make you lose it faster. And fearing grief will last forever can trap you in it.
Because you're projecting that current feeling onto this huge, imagined timeline.
It's a powerful way the mind creates a kind of perceived certainty about an uncertain future, often just based on a temporary emotional state. It sort of locks you into seeing things only through that current filter.
Okay. Building on that idea of how initial information sticks,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about anchoring.
Anchoring, right? This is the bias where you become disproportionately influenced by the very first piece of information you hear or encounter about something. It sets an anchor in your mind.
This feels like it happens constantly, doesn't it? Like, the source mentions how the initial beliefs you absorbed from your parents can anchor your worldview for years.
Mm-hmm. Even if you later encounter conflicting information.
Right. Or in a negotiation, the very first offer can dramatically set the range of possibility, right? Even if it was a totally extreme starting point.
Absolutely. The source also mentions hearing about, say, a few people's book advances and immediately using that tiny sample size as an anchor for what your book might earn, regardless of all the other factors involved.
That initial number or idea just sort of digs in.
It does. It acts as a reference point, and it pulls subsequent judgments towards it, often without you even consciously realizing it's happening. It powerfully shapes your expectations.
Okay, bias number 4, negativity.
Yeah.
Why are we so, I don't know, captivated by bad news, disasters, drama?
Yeah, it's a strong pull. The source suggests it's more than just simple curiosity. Our selective attention capacity seems naturally drawn to the negative.
We notice it more.
We perceive bad news as more important. Yeah. Perhaps partly because our brains are kind of wired to prioritize potential threats, an old survival mechanism.
Makes sense.
But also, possibly, the source hints, due to a deeper, maybe more mysterious fascination with negativity's place in life. The point is, our attention is automatically weighted towards the perceived threat or significance of the bad stuff.
So it's like our brains flag negative information with a higher priority alert, which I guess makes sense from a survival standpoint, but it also means our perceived reality can feel a lot more dangerous or dramatic than it objectively is.
Exactly. It's a filter that highlights potential problems, maybe over-highlights them sometimes.
Okay. That leads kind of nicely into the next one, conservatism, which the source calls a sister bias to anchoring. How does that work?
Yes, conservatism. It's the tendency to, well, hold on to your initial beliefs, those anchors we just talked about, more strongly, even when you're presented with new information that might be more accurate.
So there's a resistance.
There's an apprehension, yeah. A resistance to updating your views simply because you believed the first information you encountered more readily.
So once that anchor is set by the first piece of info, this conservatism bias helps keep it firmly in place. It makes it harder for new data to shift your perspective, even if that new data gives a more complete or accurate picture.
Right. It prioritizes the coherence of the story you've already started building in your head over maybe integrating potentially disruptive new facts. Keep the story consistent.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move to number 6, the clustering illusion.
Ah, the clustering illusion. This is a fun one, actually. It's the bias that causes you to see patterns or, well, clusters in truly random events or data.
Right.
Simply because your mind is looking for them, you've sort of subconsciously decided to find a pattern.
Oh, I think I know this one. Like when you decide you want a specific type of car,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly you see that car everywhere. Or you buy a specific red jacket, and then you start noticing everyone seems to be wearing red.
That's exactly it. You're not actually seeing more of them than were there before. Your mind is just highlighting the instances that match your new focus, your new interest.
So I'm creating the pattern.
You're subconsciously priming yourself, yeah. And your brain is busy finding the examples that confirm this new awareness you have. To you, it looks like a real pattern, a trend maybe. But to someone else, it's just random noise.
Which feels very tightly linked to the next one, confirmation bias, number 7.
Absolutely. They're close cousins. Confirmation bias is probably one of the most well-known biases. It's your tendency to actively seek out, interpret, and importantly, remember information that confirms your existing beliefs or preconceptions.
This feels like a huge part of how we mentally insulate our worldview, doesn't it?
It really is.
The source describes it as how we self-validate. We kind of curate the information we consume or pay attention to, essentially to prove to ourselves that we were right all along.
It strongly reinforces that story your mind has constructed, making it feel more solid, more coherent, and therefore more undeniably true to you. It creates a kind of feedback loop.
Yeah, I could see that. Okay, finally, the 8th bias listed in the source, choice supportive bias.
Right. Choice supportive bias. This one means that once you have consciously chosen something, could be a product, a partner, a political candidate, even just an idea you've adopted, you tend to view that chosen item or concept more positively, and you tend to downplay its flaws more often than you would if you hadn't chosen it.
So making the choice itself changes how you see the thing.
It does. And that highlights something important the source brings up, the crucial role of autonomy, of feeling like you made the choice freely.
Why is that so crucial?
Because if you choose something, this bias kicks in strongly to support that choice. It often makes you a bit blind to its downsides and maybe overly focused on its positives. Your relationship with that choice moving forward is heavily influenced by the simple fact that you made it.
It's like your mind is justifying the decision after the fact.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Solidifying that connection and reinforcing the perceived rightness of your own choice.
Okay, so, wow. We've explored naive realism, this deep-seated belief that we see objective truth. And then we've looked at 8 specific ways our minds are actually, well, filtering, selecting, projecting, kind of constructing the reality we experience. What's the big takeaway from all this? What does it all mean together?
Well, the collective impact of these biases really is that you are basically by default prevented from seeing a truly objective reality. It's just not how the system works. The source makes it pretty clear. What feels like collective reality, like everyone agreeing on something, is often just one person's subjective experience colliding with another person's subjective experience.
And the core issue isn't just that we have these subjective views.
No.
It's that we overwhelmingly mistake our own subjective view for the objective reality. That seems to be the crux of it.
Exactly. And the source implies something quite profound there, that maybe our inability to coexist sometimes, to really understand each other, maybe it doesn't come from some inherent flaw in humanity, but from this simple yet huge lack of understanding about how our own minds build our perceived world.
We don't understand our own operating system, essentially.
In a way, yes. And recognizing these biases is therefore incredibly valuable for you, for the listener. It offers a really powerful framework. Well, for questioning your own immediate assumptions, for starters, for maybe understanding why someone else might see the exact same situation completely differently than you do, and practically for navigating the just overwhelming amount of information you encounter every single day more effectively.
It truly sounds like a shortcut to being well-informed. Not just about facts and figures, but about the fundamental machinery in your head that processes those facts and figures.
Right.
And shapes your understanding of basically everything. It adds this critical layer of self-awareness.
It really does. It can provide a path towards maybe a little more humility about your own perspective and potentially unlock greater empathy for the constructed realities of others.
Okay. So to wrap up, we've taken a deep dive into this idea of naive realism and uncovered 8 common cognitive biases. These tools the mind uses to build your subjective reality: projection, extrapolation, anchoring.
Negativity, conservatism, clustering illusion, confirmation, and choice supportive bias.
Whole toolkit.
A whole toolkit. And if, as the source so pointedly states near the beginning, the confidence people have in their beliefs is not a measure of the quality of evidence, but of the coherence of the story that the mind has managed to construct.
That quote again.
Yeah. Then maybe pause for a moment and consider, what stories are you actively building in your own mind right now, and what evidence are they truly based on, versus just how well they fit the narrative you like?
Something to think about as you go about your day.
Definitely something to think about.